Welcome everyone. We are live with another episode of Level Up Law, where every Tuesday at noon, South Carolina Legal Services levels up your legal knowledge about an area of law that we practice in. I'm Senior Staff Attorney Susan Ingalls here in the background with our producer Kenneth Elliott, and you are viewing live Attorney Elliott Tate from our Charleston office. Elliott is our statewide education law unit head. He's a veteran of Level Up Law, so we welcome him back for today's episode, which kicks off a 2 and possibly even 3-part series on your child's IEP, a section-by-section guide. So welcome, Elliott.
Hey, Susie.
Awesome. But before Elliott gets started, we do want our audience to know that this is not legal advice. It's just general information for you, the public. If you need the help of a lawyer, you can call our intake line here at South Carolina Legal Services. That's got operators standing by. Our intake specialists are answering calls Monday through Thursday, 9 to 6. Or you can apply online, which is 24/7. All of that information on how to do that will be provided at the end of Elliott's presentation today. Also, as another reminder, all of our episodes are posted by our wonderful producer, Kenneth Elliott, to the Level Up Law playlist on our YouTube channel, usually within 24 hours. And I do want to point out that South Carolina Legal Services provides online classrooms in this and other legal subjects. So be sure to check those out at www.learnthelawlaw.org. Now, today, Elliott can answer general questions if there is time at the conclusion of his presentation. So put any questions you have in the question box. Be sure to check out our social media, like, subscribe, and get all the up-to-date information that we provide here on Level Up Law, and also all of our other resources. Those websites, social media handles, and other resource connections will be found on the last slide in Elliott's presentation today. So enough about all that. Welcome, Elliott Tate, on your child's IEP, a section-by-section guide. Elliott, take it away.
Thanks, Susie. Okay, so, this is going to be a dense review of a complex document. So I want to put that out there. And as you heard Susie say, it's at least 2 parts. I was doing it this morning. This might end up being 3 parts. I'm not going to skip anything. I'm not going to gloss over anything. We're going to get deep into an actual IEP that's been redacted, and we're going to go through it and talk about it. So, so what is this? So some background, right? An IEP. What's an IEP? It's an Individualized Education Plan. It's a huge, complex, overwhelming document. It's a contract. It's a summary of psychoeducational data. It's a look into the future. And apart from your child, the student in your case, it's the single most important part of the special education process. So in this Level Up Law and in this online classroom, we're going to walk you through each section of your child's IEP. We're going to explain what it is, what needs to go there, and why it matters. Additionally, we're going to provide you with tips and tricks, just practice pointers to help you advocate for your child through the IEP process. I've been doing these now 9 years, so seen a lot, been working all over the state of South Carolina. So, and in conjunction with my colleagues who are constantly commiserating with me, consulting with me about things, we should have a good picture for you on what to expect. So who is this for? This classroom is designed for students and for families, and it's done by attorneys who represent students and their families. Furthermore, this classroom assumes a child already has been qualified for special education services. So qualifying a student is a whole nother process. And if you believe your child might qualify for special education services but isn't yet qualified, we're going to provide some information and a document in our online classroom, and we're going to talk about the online classroom here in a second and a link to that. There is a specific form letter that we've provided that you can fill out. Essentially, just you fill out the school's information, your students' information. And it's specific because it's got to have special language to trigger the statute and the timeline of the statute. And by statute, I mean the law on this. So these are federal laws that we're talking about. The IDEA is a big federal law that explains what services a public school has to provide for a child with special needs. And as you might imagine, if you don't trigger that specific language and that timeline with this form, then the school might delay, might punt, might play some games with you. And that's certainly been my experience with clients before they come to me. So that's going to be available in our online classroom. Again, for further clarity, I might mention this multiple times, but the South Carolina Parent Guide for K through 12 students, which was published by Appleseed, and which Legal Services helped write and review. That is a lovely resource. We're going to link to it and probably have a copy of it in our online classroom. If y'all want to just like Google that right now, like open up a tab, Google that, save that, bookmark that, you can download it. It is a comprehensive, expansive guide for parents on just about every issue that you would come into contact with as a parent, as a student in South Carolina. It touches on special ed. There's a huge section on special ed, and there's also just general ed stuff. We're currently recording this in July. You know, people are having to enroll their kids in school. There's a section on enrollment. Undoubtedly, we get cases every year with the same schools, the same school districts having issues enrolling kids properly. So I'll leave that there. And again, y'all bookmark that. You might not need it right now. You might not need it in 6 months, but I guarantee you will eventually need to refer to it. So save that. And then as a side note, most aspects of this classroom, this presentation is going to apply in every public school in the country, because we're talking about a federal law, the IDEA, that applies to every public school in the country. However, there's going to be maybe some examples that are specific to the state in which I practice, South Carolina, and the colleagues and folks that have helped me review and combine all this information for this presentation. We're all South Carolina lawyers. So that's just kind of a side note there. Great. A glossary of terms. So in our online classroom at learnthelaw.org, that's where this is going to get posted in addition to our YouTube channel. There's going to be additional videos. We are recording an expulsion hearing, mock expulsion hearing. We are recording a mock manifestation determination review hearing, an MDR hearing. There's also my previous level up laws, one about the IEP versus 504. That's there. It's also in our YouTube channel. But a glossary of terms is really important, because if you've had any experience in this area, there's so much jargon. There's acronyms, and they're dizzying and they're confusing. And most people working in this field just assume everyone knows them. And that's just not really fair. So to sort of level the playing field, we've compiled just a basic list of acronyms, you know, anything from IEP to IDEA to FAPE to appropriate, all that stuff, right? So lots of terms. So that's where that's going to get posted. Hey guys, here we are. Okay, let me scroll down because I've got all the glossary right here. So we are jumping into an actual IEP, and you see it's a 14-page document that was done here with me in my home school district of Charleston. We're going to go through this thing section by section, and I'm going to explain what section this is, why we need this information, what should you be looking out for, practice tips. So here we go. Type of meeting. There are a couple options here. If it's the first IEP for the student, it'll say initial IEP, just like it says right here. If it's the meeting that you're having at the end of the year or at the end of the IEP itself, it'll say annual review. If this is an interim meeting that was called before the end of the year, before the end of the life of the IEP, it'll say special review. And let me just pause for a second to talk about special reviews. So a lot of parents, a lot of attorneys think that you come to the table, you develop an IEP, it's good for a year, and if you've got any issues, then you wait till the end of the year. Not true. At any point in time, you as a parent or your attorney can call a special review meeting. And maybe what's happening in the IEP, what's happening in the plan is not appropriate anymore. Either your student is doing extremely well and the goals just weren't challenging enough, or maybe they continue to having behavioral issues and they're getting suspensions and we need to intervene more. That is always your right to do, is to call a special review meeting. Come back to the table to look at what we can do better. So it's not just you do it once and you wait a year and then you do it again. Something you can always be revisiting. See, you'll notice that it says transition. So transition will be noted if the student turns 13 during the lifetime of the IEP. Because eventually the goal of education, including special education, is to prepare kids to transition to a life outside of school, whether that be college or whether that be entering the workforce, right? We want to prepare kids to transition to being active and good parts of our community who can get a job and sustain themselves, right? So that specifically needs to be addressed in the IEP as a transition starting at this age. And this is, I think, because of how young this kid is, this is probably the first time that this has been noted as a transition. So, student invitation. If the student has questions about the IEP meeting, he will contact so-and-so. So your child's typically expected to come and participate in the IEP meeting. And the older they get, the more important that is. Your child should feel like a member of the team and should see all the people working together for their benefit. It's also common to give the student a point person to contact about the IEP. Should they have questions, that's typically going to be their special ed teacher, or if your district has a special ed coordinator, it's probably going to be them. Whoever's drafting this document is probably going to be the one that they'll contact. That's also you as parent, or you as advocate, you're going to be contacting that person directly initially for any kinds of issues, to call a new meeting, a special review meeting, for example. A practice tip I put in here: if your child is young or has an issue with sitting through long meetings, if you've got a lawyer or an advocate, these meetings can last 2, 3, 4 hours easily. That's a long time for a student to be sitting listening to professionals bark back and forth about data and goals. So if you think that your kid isn't going to be handling that, just let the school know they won't be attending, or will only be attending the beginning or the end of the meeting, something like that. But it's a good idea to see that there's a collaboration for them. I think it's important for a kid to see that there's a team working to make sure that they're getting the education they need. So especially in kind of contentious situations, which of course happens. And as an attorney, most of the reason I get involved is because it's been elevated to a point where there's some contention and some acrimony, right? So, all right, enrollment. let's break this down for a little bit. So you see that there's a service district, a service school, and a home district and a home school. So what is this? The service district or school is the place where your child is actually receiving their IEP services. The home school, their home district, is where your child actually resides. And for most people, that's going to be the same place. And why is that? So let's kind of get into that. The home district, the home school, is responsible by law for providing your child with what we call FAPE. And now I'm going to have to talk about FAPE, right? So FAPE, it's an acronym that we use. We use it as a noun, we use it as a verb, we use it whenever we can in special ed. And free appropriate education is the legal standard that we all use. That is what your child is entitled to under federal law. That's what the public school has to provide them if they've got a disability that requires specialized instruction. So that's what the school's got to provide. And that's what the home school, so wherever you reside, your home school, your home district has to provide that to your child. Now, sometimes the home school, the home district is unable to meet your child's needs. This more commonly occurs in rural school districts or with children who have complicated disabilities. And in those cases, the home school, the home district will provide FAPE by contracting with a different school, different district called the service district or service school. And pause again here to say something that I say probably every IEP meeting I go to because it just comes up. And that is this. So, excuse me, the job of the IEP team is to determine what the student needs to get FAPE, to get an appropriate education, to be able to achieve challenging goals in light of their disability. And what happens a lot of times at IEP meetings is everyone gets into the meeting, the school brings their toolbox and sets it on the table and goes, okay, so let's open the toolbox. We've got a screwdriver and we've got a wrench. So let's work together and see what we can do with the screwdriver and this wrench. Well, in the course of the IEP meeting, you discover this kid actually needs a hammer. And the school district sometimes goes, well, gee, oh man, yeah, hammer. Ooh, well, we've got a wrench, we've got a screwdriver. So we can maybe like use the wrench to kind of like, maybe it's kind of like solid, right? We could probably get away with the wrench. We can maybe whack things with the screwdriver. Well, we just don't have a hammer. Man, shoot, phooey, wish we had a hammer. All right, well, moving on. And you go, no, that's, well, hold on. Like, if we determine as the IEP team the kid needs a hammer, then that's what the school has to provide. If you don't have a hammer in your toolbox, well, then you got to go get one. Either you buy that hammer, or you find a school district that's got a hammer in their toolbox, and the school district pays for your child to be transported from your home to that school where they have a hammer. That is the legal standard. If a team determines that you need a hammer for FAPE, then the school gets you a hammer. I'm going to pause, mostly for water, and see, Susie, any questions yet? We're not only halfway through the first page. How we doing?
No question, Elliot, but keep on keeping on. It's really very informative, I think, to do it this way.
Well, you're very nice.
We'll be able to timestamp the video, and that'll be helpful to people too when they want to go back and review it. So,
outstanding. Okay, all right. Oh, look at that. It's got the reviews are in from Susie. Thank you. Okay, so we talked about the enrollment section. Let's look at grade. And you see like a parentheses S. and then you see a range 7 to 8. That's a little strange, right? It's not uncommon. The reason typically is that special education students require modifications to the general education curriculum, which make it difficult to kind of determine what grade they're in. So that's kind of why we've got a range for this student. As a practice tip, we wrote in here, for high school, you need to make sure and try and keep your child on a diploma track if that's appropriate. There's certain credits, certain amount of seat time that you've got to get to qualify for a diploma. And sometimes special education students, depending on how much time you're pulled out, you start to move away from the diploma track. So I just say, that keep that in mind. If I've got a high school student and we're at an IEP meeting, I'm almost definitely going to bring that up just to say, hey, just checking in. This child is still on the diploma track, right? And just deferring to the experts on the team to say, oh yeah, let's look at that. Yeah, because there's like a complicated algorithm that they use to determine that. It's not that complicated, but I want to make sure that they're on the record saying yes. We looked at how much time they've got, yes, and the credits, yes, we should be good. So, all right, primary area of disability. Guys, we're just about to breach the first half of the first page. And this part is super important. This is the reason why your child qualifies for an IEP. So it informs the rest of the IEP. And again, the standard is your child has a disability, right? That's one part. And then the second part is that disability is such that your student requires specialized instruction. You can have more than one, right? You've got primary here. This child could have, a secondary area of disability. And as a practice tip, make sure relevant disabilities are listed. And for a lot of students, you might have a bunch. You might have 3, 4, 5, 6 disabilities that your pediatrician and or psychiatrist have diagnosed. That's common. And some parents want to get all of them on there. And my practice point on that is, the relevant ones need to be on there. So the ones that impact their learning, right? The disabilities that are diagnosed which impact their learning need to be on there. Don't let the schools dismiss one because the primary area of disability is complex or pervasive. So by that I mean a recent example from my practice, a child with autism. Primary disability is autism. That's pretty pervasive, right? It's clear that that's affecting their communication, it's affecting their learning, but the child's also been diagnosed with ADHD and has some behavioral issues related to that. Well, sometimes the school's gonna look at that and say, I mean, come on, it's autism. Like, we know what we're doing. It's pervasive. We don't need to throw in some other things. But to that I say, no, it's important. If you've got a diagnosis and we've got data to support that the ADHD is impacting learning, we need to add it on there because the IEP needs to address it. Another thing that you see schools do is they say, well, I mean, yeah, okay, we've got the diagnosis for ADHD, but we don't have any data to support that it impacts his learning. So we can't add it. And let's stop and listen to this, because you will hear, we don't have enough data. We don't have the data for that. We don't have enough data a lot. And that's true a lot of the times, right? It's not, however, an excuse for not putting it on, as an area of disability. It's not a good excuse for not developing a goal for it. What I do when I hear that is I say, Well, let's get the data. Like, you're right, we can't do anything right now, but let's put a pin in this. You go get the data. We'll come back to the table in a month or two, and we'll develop whatever we need to develop based on your data. It's a data. We talk about data because this is all science-based, right? This is all research-based. We're not just willy-nilly doing whatever we want based on the tides with your child, right? This is all evidence-based curriculum, and we can't do things without data. That shouldn't be a scapegoat for the school, though. Whenever you hear we don't have the data, your knee-jerk response should be, well, go get it. Go get it. Like, you should just be sneezing it. Go get it. Another point I'll make is, if this is a kid who's had an IEP previously, sometimes the appropriate thing to say, in addition to go get it, is, wait, why don't you have it? Why don't you have that data? And you might get a from people. So, the school should be keeping data because they're the ones that can do it. And it's important to develop the IEP. So let's see, how are we doing here? What else did I want to say about this? Oh, some other examples of this. So let's talk about other health impairment. So this kid, for background, this kid has ADHD and ODD. And ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. It's a mental health disorder that impacts behavior. So when you come into contact with opposition, oftentimes from authority, your automatic reaction is defiance. So that was this young kid's disabilities that impacted his learning and required specialized instruction. So other health impairment, OHI, is what that would fall under. So it's commonly used for children with behavioral mental health diagnoses like ADHD, ODD, that sort of thing. Commonly just put under the umbrella of other health impairments. So some other examples that you'll see, a specific learning disability, which is shorthanded to SLD, autism spectrum disorder, blindness, sight impairment, deafness, hearing impairment, speech language impairment, emotional disturbance, which is kind of a strange catch-all, for like depression and other and mood disorders, that sort of thing. So that is, I think I hit pretty hard on primary area of disability. Very important, very important. That's why it's towards the beginning. Parent guardian information. This is important because this is how the school is going to contact you. And you might be surprised to know that the school is not keeping this updated. If you call the front office to update your address, to update your phone number, update your email address, that's not going to automatically make it into the IEP. And it's really important that your updated information be on there, because that's how they're going to, the school is going to hopefully comply with all of the requirements of law. So they've got to communicate with you about data. They've got to give you progress reports. If there's any issues, they're going to use that information. And if it's not updated, then that's basically on you. So make sure that's updated. Dates. So like any contract, the IEP specifies a start date and an end date. However, unlike a normal contract, the IEP just doesn't dissolve at the end of the end date. The school is required to continue to provide FAPE regardless of the expiration. That's an issue that comes up, like, oh, my IEP expired. What happens? Well, the school has an obligation to still provide FAPE. And let's try and prevent that, right? So to prevent that, where that situation where an end date passes and no action's been taken, the IEP team is required to meet for the annual review meeting to review the previous IEP and develop a new one. So there's the start date, right? There's the end date, which is just under a year later, right? It's just a year minus 1 day. We've got a next annual review date, which is the IEP end date. Kind of a little close, but okay. And then you see next reevaluation eligibility. So evaluation. So, you know, we'll talk about that maybe at the start of the next page, but we'll do it now. Evaluations. So, man, we could do a whole nother series on evaluations. When you request the school to evaluate your kid to see if they qualify for an IEP, that triggers this process by which a school psychologist meets with the parent. Typically, there might be a small little IEP meeting with some other folks, administrator, that sort of thing, talk about kind of what areas you're seeing. And then the evaluator will spend a couple weeks evaluating your student, your child. And they'll put them through a battery of tests and evaluations and all this stuff, and then there's a bunch of data. Typically every 2 or 3 years, you should consider reevaluating. And most of it, and you should at least talk about it at the IEP team. And you might have not relevant updated information because kids, you know, as you guys know, kids change substantially year to year. So data, last year's data might not be helpful, might not be a good indicator of where they are now. So you do a reevaluation. Again, reevaluation to get data to then develop the IEP, right? So three years later, it's not uncommon for 3 years after the previous evaluation, the school to put next reeval eligibility date right there. So that's the maximum allowable by law. So that's where that is. Let me pause for some water. We are what, 30 minutes in? We're not even done with the first page, y'all.
And now you're starting to get some questions.
Uh-oh. What you got for me, Susie?
All right, here's what we got. First of all, a nice comment. This is an awesome presentation as we prepare for another school year.
Cool. All right.
And
good question. I like that one.
Nothing is done when the data is collected. What do you do then?
If nothing is done when the, sorry, so if nothing is done when the data is collected? Okay, so I mentioned going out and collecting the data and then nothing's done. Well, you've got a potential violation of the IDEA, right? So if the data supports the school doing something, so it supports a child's, what would be FAPE for a child, right? So the data says or suggests, well, this kid needs this service, needs this goal. If the data supports that, then the school needs to provide it. If the school doesn't provide it, then they have violated the IDEA, they have failed to provide FAPE, and that would require the student and their family filing what's called a due process hearing request, which is the administrative process by which you seek enforcement of the IDEA. So, you know, by going to court, by suing the school, that's what that is, right? So any violation, alleged violation of the IDEA, failure to provide FAPE, you take that to, you file a due process hearing request. Your other option is you can file a complaint with the State Department of Ed. And that's administrative in the sense that there's no hearing, there's no trial, there's no judge or hearing officer making a decision like in a due process case. The same issues are there, but instead of having a full trial, the State Department of Ed and their attorneys and general counsel do an investigation, hear your side, hear the school side, and then issue a decision. So that's not the way I like to do it. As a control freak and attorney, I don't want to punt to someone else. I want to be in charge of my case, and I want to present it, and I want to call witnesses, and I want to control the evidence as much as I can in view of the rules of evidence and procedure. And then I want to have a hearing officer issue a decision that could then be appealable to district court. So,
Okay.
good question.
Can you take a couple more here real quick?
Yes, let's do it. My goal is to just do page 1.
So this is actually just a comment, I think, or a note. It's important to note that the SEED document that lays out the very specific eligibility requirements has changed as of July 1st in South Carolina. So parents may want to look at those new requirements for each eligibility category.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's a great tip. Yeah, SEED, the special education eligibility determination factors or something like that. Yeah, so that's like the document that the Department of Ed puts out to help evaluators and ultimately the IEP team determine who qualifies for an IEP. Super important document.
And one other note, that for a parent who didn't get action with results, you can always request an IEE first.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I don't want to get too much into that, but an IEE is an independent evaluation that is paid for by the school district. If the school district thinks that their evaluation is appropriate and doesn't want to pay the $2,000 to $3,000 for you to go get your own independent evaluation, then they can file a case and have a hearing officer decide that. So yeah, it's an option. It's an option. You should definitely consult with a lawyer if you're doing that, because especially if the district's resistant to your request. But yeah.
All right, I'll let you continue on.
Okay, here we go, guys. Let's continue on page 1. Consideration of special factors. I'm trying to make sure I hit all the information I want. Oh yeah, okay. The IDA requires the IEP to consider this checklist of factors. So let's look at them all. Special factors. The student's behavior impedes the student's learning or the learning of others. So the IDA requires the team to consider, quote, positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies that have been used to address the behavior. So school-wide, PBIS, and then a behavioral intervention plan, the BIP, right? That's what we call a BIP, a behavioral intervention plan. You know, one great option is to develop a behavioral intervention plan, and you see that these are checked, right? This is checked. Yes. The BIP, it's a separate document that targets certain behaviors your child exhibits which impede their learning. And impeding your learning includes, of course, being suspended or expelled. Because if you're not physically in school because you got suspended or expelled, you're not learning. So that's an impediment to your learning. The BIP lays out interventions the school will use to both prevent those behaviors and then specific steps the school will take to when those behaviors occur, right? So you've got a kid who gets triggered by something, you want to give him the skills to manage that. A lot of therapy and counseling, for instance, but just learning coping mechanisms. But if that kid gets triggered, then you want to have basically like a flow chart. So you try this. If that doesn't work, you try this. If that doesn't work, you try this. As many interventions to try and de-escalate the situation so that this kid is not getting a referral to the office. And again, we're looking at these kids based on their disability, right? So their disability is causing them to act in such a way that that is different than their general education peers, right? So because of their disability, because of their ADHD, their ODD, they elevate to a point where their actions might typically require a suspension. The use of profanity, for instance, especially in older kids, that come, many disabilities manifest themselves as profanity towards teachers. And of course, we know you can't do that. But if it's a result of your disability, it's a manifestation of your disability, well then the school needs to deal with it appropriately. And it's actually discrimination to hold them to the same standard as a general ed student. You are ignoring their disability. So to develop a behavioral intervention plan, a BIP, you'll likely need to conduct the second thing, a functional behavioral assessment, which is it's a very specialized kind of evaluation done by the school psychologist. And we oftentimes call it an FBA because, of course, we love to just shorten everything and increase the list of jargon that we have. So the school psychologist for this one observes your student in class at least a few times, might even send some questionnaires out to you and the teachers just to kind of figure out when the behaviors are occurring, what seems to be causing, so what's the antecedent, and then what's the result, right? So what exactly are they doing? So that we can pinpoint the behaviors. So again, we could probably do a 2-part series on that, and maybe we will. What else we got here? Oh, I have a practice tip here I wanted to get in. A BIP is incredibly useful at preventing special education students from being expelled. If a special ed student has done something that rises to the level of expulsion, the IEP team has to meet, right? There's a special meeting. It's called a manifestation determination review. And again, our online classroom is going to have a mock MDR where we do one based on a real case. So they meet and they ask 2 questions. One, was the behavior a manifestation of the student's disability? If the answer is yes, you cannot expel them. And then 2, you say, was the behavior the result of the school failing to implement the IEP and the BIP? So if you've got a good behavioral intervention plan that's specific, that targets these issues, that has a plan in place, the school's got to follow it. And I will tell you many, many times, if you've got a good BIP, the school's not going to follow it. There might be one thing that they forget, and I don't want to be like pulling technicalities on the school necessarily, right? But if you've got a good BIP, the school should be following it. And a lot of times, if your kid's getting recommended for expulsion, it's because the school didn't do what they were supposed to. So really important to get a good BIP in place. Guys, we're still on page 1. Here we go. So yeah, so you have this, you have a question about this student exhibits behavior that requires a BIP. Yes, it's like they sort of are asking the same things over and over again, but so typically, if you see one check, you'll see all 3 checks typically. Really important that they are. And I will also pause and say, you will see, because it's like a checklist with a bunch of questions and information, you will see schools just blow right through this at an IEP meeting. Really important not to let them do that. If you have no behavioral issues, okay, cool. But if there are some, then pausing here and saying, hold on, we need to look into these things. Really important to do so. Get that on the record. The student has limited English proficiency. You see that here, right? This federal law, the IDEA, requires a school to consider the language needs of a special education student who might not speak English very well. This may require the school to hire a bilingual special education teacher, for example. With that being said, the IDEA is clear that a student with limited English proficiency, what we call LEP, doesn't qualify for special education simply because they're not proficient in English, right? So Not speaking English is not a disability, obviously. However, it's not an excuse for not appropriately evaluating a kid, right? So if you normally administer a test in English orally, you can't administer that same evaluation, that same test to a kid who doesn't speak English proficiently. You won't get the right data because the language barrier is such that you're not getting at the heart of the question, right? You're not getting data on that child's brain. You're getting data on whether or not they speak English. That's not the data that we need. So you will experience some eye rolls from schools when you bring this up. Now, I happen to be a bilingual attorney. I represent Spanish-speaking families in special education matters, and you get a lot of eye rolls. Like, I mean, where do you expect us to find a Spanish-speaking evaluator? Where do you expect us to find a Spanish-speaking special ed teacher? We have a hard time just finding English-speaking special ed teachers who are qualified. I mean, but to that I go, depending on my mood, I go, well, so what? Like this is your obligation under federal law, so you do it. Or, I mean, I'll have a judge explain why you need to do it. Or if I'm feeling, more compassionate and empathetic, I go, yeah, I hear you, man. Let's see if we can find someone. So it's also a question about, if you've got just simply an interpreter, do you lose, is it appropriate to perform certain evaluations through an interpreter? Are certain things lost in the interpretation, number one, but also does it impact how the evaluation is supposed to actually be done? Like, does that impact the data? These evaluations have very specific requirements for how they are to be administered. Because again, this is science. Imagine that an evaluator and a student are, they're subjects and scientists in a lab, right? As much as we can, we're trying to get good, secure data from a lab. And if entering something in like an interpreter into that situation, does that impact the results? Does that muddy the sample? So here we are towards the end of page one, y'all. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do page one today, y'all. We're gonna do it. I promise. The student is blind or visually impaired. IDEA requires that the IEP team to consider the teaching in Braille and the use of appropriate reading and writing media for such students, right? So you got to be providing that appropriately to students who are visually impaired or blind. The student has communication needs. Isn't that interesting? It's oddly broad and unspecific. But the IDEA requires the IEP team to consider such needs and provide opportunities for such students to be able to communicate with their peers at their grade level. So, we might be talking about speech therapy. We might be talking about something more like assistive technology. So and we'll talk about that now. These are things that are used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with a disability. Assistive technology. So devices or services. So these are not medical devices, which are like implanted into your kid, right? These could be anything from like a special type of leg or arm brace to an iPad to a complex kind of communication system. Kids with certain kind of neurological or brain disorders, that sort of thing, right? Like Stephen Hawking, right? That's the one that comes to mind immediately, right? So if that's what your kid requires to communicate, guess who's got to provide it? The school. Should we just stop at page one? I mean, we're pretty far into this thing, and y'all, this is a deep dive. I promise the next one's going to go a bit quicker, but we're actually going to look at the evaluation data that the school psychologist provided for this IEP. We're going to get really deep into that and try and understand the evaluation data, why it's relevant, how it applies to the IEP, how we use that data to develop goals and determine services. That'll be next time, and that is, watch me skip through all this. So this is what I thought I might. What's that?
That's a great idea, Elliot, because this was fantastic, and we do actually have just a few more questions.
Oh, cool.
If maybe we can answer, give some information for those very quickly,
yeah.
And then we'll start with part 2 on August 9th. But in the meantime, I did want to mention that one of our viewers has mentioned a website, the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. I believe that was created with a grant from the Department of Education. So with your permission, I can put that in the chat if that's all right.
Sure. I mean, I've not looked at it, but go for it.
I don't think any.
Who was that? Was that from someone I know?
I don't know. That's from Ms. Wingate.
I'm sure it's good.
Okay. Well, I think if it was done with a grant from the Department of Education, that gives it a little bit of gravitas. Now, here's a question. Do special factors, does that have any additional categories? It says some states maybe include medical needs. Is that something?
That's yeah, and maybe this IEP is from 2018, so maybe there's been like a move to add that. I think that hits all of the special factors that are listed in the IDEA, or should. But if a school on an IEP considers more, great. But I think that probably hits all of the special factors that, again, are listed in the federal law.
Okay, and what's the next step to get a BIP when they're just calling the parent or using ISS for the behavior issues?
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, such a great question. Yeah, so that you can get a behavioral intervention plan in an IEP or in a 504 plan. It's the same thing, and you can get it in either under either plan. And if y'all want to know the differences between IEPs and 504s, well, guess what? We've already done one of these on the difference between IEPs and 504s. You can check our YouTube channel, or you can check our online classroom. I see it's posted there too. So, you will need to, depending on the circumstances, you will need to call either a 504 plan meeting, or you'll need to trigger the IEP process. If you haven't already. So if your kid isn't already qualified for a 504 or an IEP, then you need to do the initial process. If they are already qualified, then essentially that's a failure to provide FAPE kind of thing. So you should make your request done in writing. You should call an IEP meeting, definitely a special review, and have that looked at, and get the school on the record saying yes or no, or delaying you. If you've got a 504 plan, call a 504 plan meeting, contact the 504 plan coordinator in writing, asking for a meeting to be called because you want to develop a BIP. So that, and ultimately, it's you get a lawyer, and or you file a due process complaint or a complaint with the Department of Ed to seek enforcement. But yeah, it really depends on where you are in the process. But that's a great question. You see a lot of punting and delaying. And I guess I'll jump in and say, there's an affirmative obligation the school has. We call it child find. And the school has the affirmative obligation under the IDEA to identify and qualify kids for special ed services. So that's their job. And sometimes they don't do a great job at it. Not because they're bad people, but because they're overworked, and because this is a big deal, right? I mean, this is a huge, dense contract, and it involves a lot of services and a lot of money. And sometimes it involves parents that are difficult, and sometimes those parents get attorneys that are difficult. So that's that's a lot for a school to just willingly just take on. So I've rambled.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered that question
Very
adequately,
good.
but
No, that's a great question. And then I did want to mention that Paige from Able SC is the one who provided the website. So thank you, Paige.
oh, cool. Yeah, I think
And
yes.
then one final question. Let's see. Oh, and this is about whether or not you can add a diagnosis if a child's primary area or disability is labeled as developmental delay with a secondary of speech, but they've been diagnosed with ADHD, but the school is not willing to add that.
Yeah, that's a
What would
yeah.
be the next step there?
Yeah, and obviously this is not legal advice. You know, so again, there has to be data to support that disability is impacting their learning in some capacity, right? That requiring specialized education, or instruction rather. So there's kind of a practical question as well. They don't want to add it, but why do you want to add it? And it might be for the reasons that we've already discussed. And if so, then I guess the next question is, well, is there data to support that the ADHD is impacting learning? And I'm imagining it's going to be behavioral things, or maybe even just kind of like they can't complete their work timely. They're often distracted, so I don't know if they need accommodations or if they need some behavioral interventions or services related to behavior. If any of that's true, then you request it to be added. They say no. You go, well, that's where the fight starts, right? If you got the data to support it, then you can elevate it to the next level, right? Then you hold them accountable by either filing a complaint with the Department of Ed, or you get a lawyer and you file a due process complaint. But yeah, it's yeah, and in addition to legal services, and I've got our info here, that you can apply for a free legal aid lawyer. We've got lawyers all over the state. We've got 9 offices all over the state. I'm in charge of training and maintaining our education attorneys. So there's the 1-888-346-5592 number, and the hours there. You can also apply online, like Susie said. There's also, other great community options. Family Connections. I know some folks are here for Family Connections, and Disability Rights SC. What used to be Protection and Advocacy is now Disability Rights SC. They employ advocates and attorneys who are not bound by our income requirements, right? So as legal aid, we look at your household income, and if you make too much money, then you can't get a free lawyer. Disability Rights SC, not so much. They can take you if you've got a disability and you've got a legal issue, and they're wonderful people. They are our brothers and sisters in arms. So Disability Rights SC if you don't qualify for legal services.
And then I guess Able SC can be helpful as well with some of their resources. So
yeah.
we thank all of these great viewers for letting us know that they're here, and some of the information that they can provide is really awesome. But Elliot, great job. I want to thank you for a great presentation, and it looks like this will be a little bit lengthier series than we thought, but I think that's great because I love the idea of going line by line through these things so people can really get a good idea of what the ins and outs of it are. So it's such an important area of law, especially right now with the return to school is looming ahead. So, and as you said, we do assist clients with these education legal issues quite a bit. So this was really helpful information. And here on the screen for everyone is our contact information. Please do reach out if you are in need. Now, moving on quickly, I just want to say if you found this presentation helpful and or you even think it might be helpful to others, please do go to our YouTube channel tomorrow at SC Legal Services and share the broadcast out to people that you know. When you do that, so many more people are going to be getting this important information, and then hopefully they will join us here with Elliot for parts 2 and 3 and beyond of this series. So Elliot may have to call in the troops for some help on these. But while you're there at our YouTube channel, be sure to like the video of today's presentation because it was terrific, and we need to make sure that people know that. And while you're there, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more of this content. And if you sign up for those notifications while you're there, you'll get a notification every week when we post a new episode. So be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Level Up Law on Tuesday at noon. And again, I make mention of August 9th when Elliot will be bringing you part 2 of his section by section guide on your child's IEP.
We'll
Thanks again, Elliot. Yeah.
We'll do page 2 of 14.
Exactly. It's a lot of information, and we really appreciate you coming on and getting started, getting it out to folks.
Sure.
So thanks again, Elliot. Thank you, our audience members, for tuning in today on Level Up Law. We appreciate you being here. That concludes today's webinar.